Hey everyone, in this tutorial I'll show you how to implement flight requirements using TempFly's Requirement Provider API. A requirement provider is an object whose purpose is to introduce conditions that dictate whether a player can fly using TempFly. The API is simple enough to use that even entry-level programmers can follow along easily, as most aspects of your requirements are taken care of in the background. I will start with an empty plugin template that I will use to implement my requirements. You can see that I have TempFly listed as a soft dependency in the plugin YML because TempFly needs to initialize its APIs before we can utilize them. So I'll go ahead and make myself a new requirement. I'll just name this my requirement. My requirement has to extend requirement provider. Here are all the base methods that requirement providers need to inherit. These methods will be invoked by TempFly whenever it needs to know if a user is allowed flight, as per your conditions. For instance, when a player enters a new world, TempFly will invoke this method, handleFlightInquiry flight user world, to see if your requirement allows the flight user to fly in the given world. The handlesInquiryType method, this guy down here, is a way to indicate to TempFly if it should inquire about certain things within your requirement. So let's say your requirement has nothing to do with worlds or regions. When TempFly invokes handles with the inquiry type of world or region, simply return true. This lets the plugin know that you will handle it, and it will not call the handleFlightInquiry method. So I'll just start off by making a simple flight requirement. Let's say we don't want users to fly if the light level is below 10. For this, we don't care about worlds or regions, we only care about the location the player is in. So let's tell TempFly to ignore worlds and regions. Now I'll introduce some simple logic that checks the light level of the player's location. And that's really all it takes. Now we have to send back a flight result to TempFly. Result deny requires a number of parameters, the first being the deny reason. So for this, I'll just say the deny reason is other. It also requires the provider where the result originated, the inquiry type. This is going to be inquiry type location. And then we have an option to include a deny message. So if our flight result is the one that disabled the user's flight, our disable message will be the one shown. However, if another requirement disabled the user's flight first, that message will be shown instead. If the light level is not less than 10, we'll return a new result allow. The result allow only needs 3 parameters: the requirement provider where the result originated, the inquiry type, and the message we want sent to the user if our flight result auto-engages the user's flight. Users that have their flight enabled but cannot fly due to unmet requirements have their flight auto-enabled when those requirements have been met. And the last thing we need to do is register our requirement within TempFly. So I'll do that right now in the onEnable method. I'll get the TempFly API and register our requirement provider. Now you can do this at any point during the runtime of the server. When you register your new requirement, it will automatically reevaluate all the users. And that's it. We can go ahead and compile. So here I am on my local test server. I'll go and find a cave or something. And there we go. It sent us the message, and when we leave the cave, it should auto-enable flight. Yeah, there we go. Now let's introduce a more complex requirement. Let's say we don't want a user to fly if they are hungry. This has nothing to do with locations or regions, so we are going to have to take it a step further and manually add our requirement to the flight user when they are hungry, then remove it when they eat. For this requirement, we're not going to need any of these handleFlightInquiry methods, so they can all return null, and the handles method can return true. Now I'll go ahead and make my requirement a listener so that we can listen for the food level change event. You could see I went ahead and redid this class a bit. I moved all these methods to the bottom that we're not going to need. I've introduced a constructor with a dependency injected TempFly API. It is now a listener, and we're listening for the food level change event. We're going to need to use the API to get the player's flight user, and this is where we are going to handle our requirement. So now, if the level is less than 20, which is full health, we're going to say the user cannot fly. We're going to have to submit a new flight result. This is going to be a new result deny. The inquiry type for this is going to be different than the others. When we're manually adding requirements, we're going to use inquiry type out of scope. Now, this tells TempFly that there is a requirement in the user that it cannot itself manipulate, since we are manually adding and removing this. Now, if the user has full hunger, we're going to allow flight. So first we'll check if the user has the requirement in the first place. Now, if they do have the requirement, we could submit a new result allow. This will remove the requirement from the flight user. Now I'll go ahead and fix the main class. There, now it should be ready to compile and test. So we're back on my test server. I have flight enabled. Let's see what happens if I lose some hunger. You can see we got our flight disabled. Now let's eat a steak and see what happens. And it's back. Now let's see what happens if we mix two requirements. I'll lose some hunger. There we go, I finally lost the hunger. I can't fly anymore. I try TF, tells me you're too hungry to fly. I'll enter this disabled region. Still can't fly, but now it's because we're in a disabled region. Now let's eat. We still can't fly because we're in the disabled region, but if we leave the region, flight becomes enabled. And there you go. That's the basics of introducing your own requirements to TempFly.